I want to ask you something before we start, and I want you to actually think about it. When was the last time your legs felt strong? Not fine, not manageable, actually strong. Because here's something I've noticed after 22 years of working with older adults. Most people I see aren't failing to try. They're following advice that was never designed for a body over 65. Eat more protein, stay active, maybe take a supplement, and they do all of that, and their legs still get weaker. Getting out of a chair takes effort it didn't used to take. The stairs become something they think about before they try. And nobody, not their doctor, not their nutritionist, sometimes not even their family, has sat down and explained why. So they assume it's just age. And honestly, I understand why they assume that, because that's usually what they've been told. But it's not the whole picture. After 65, your body develops something called anabolic resistance. If nobody's mentioned that term to you, I'm genuinely not surprised. Most clinical appointments don't have time for it, but it changes everything about how you should be eating. Anabolic resistance means your muscles have become resistant to the normal triggers for growth and repair. The same protein that rebuilt muscle efficiently at 45 does a fraction of the job at 70, not because you're broken, because your biology changed, and your diet was never updated to match it. That's what today is about. I'm Dr. Thomas Ellison, vascular researcher. I've published 2 clinical studies on age-related muscle loss, and I've spent more than 2 decades watching patients do everything they were told and still lose muscle, not because they weren't trying, because the information they were given was designed for a younger body. What I'm sharing today isn't a trend, it's what the research actually says. For people specifically over 65, the simplest way I can explain anabolic resistance: at 40, you eat protein. Leucine, an amino acid, fires a signal. Muscle repairs itself. The whole process is quick, reliable. At 75, that signal gets muffled. Your muscles are still receiving it. They're just not responding the way they should. I describe it to patients like this sometimes. Imagine a smoke alarm with a battery that's almost dead. The smoke is there. The alarm is trying, but it doesn't go off the way it should. That's what's happening in a muscle that isn't getting the right nutritional support. In this part, most people are never told. Certain foods contain specific compounds that bypass that resistance. They don't just deliver protein. They help restore the signaling environment that protein needs to actually work. Most of these foods cost under $2 per serving. Most of them are already sitting in any regular grocery store. And most doctors, and I say this as one, have never mentioned a single one of them in a clinical appointment. There's a meta-analysis out of the University of Birmingham, 2023, that looked at 41 separate studies on protein intake and muscle mass in adults over 65. The finding that genuinely stopped me when I read it: adults over 65 who consumed adequate total protein, but from low leucine, high inflammatory sources, showed no meaningful difference in muscle preservation compared to those who ate very little protein at all. No meaningful difference. The wrong protein is almost as useless as no protein. That's not on any food label you've ever seen. It's not in any pamphlet, but it's in the literature. And once you understand it, the 7 foods I'm about to share make a lot more sense. Today, I'm counting down 7 foods, ranked by their specific impact on muscle health in adults over 65. All affordable, all at your regular grocery store, all studied specifically in older adults, not just adapted from research on younger people. I'm saving the most important one for last. The number 1 food on this list costs less than $1 per serving. It's been a staple in the longest living populations on Earth for centuries, and it contains 2 compounds, 2 that address the exact biological failures that make muscle building so difficult after 70. I'll get there, but the foundation comes first. Before we start, I want to hear from you. How old are you? And what does this actually feel like in your daily life right now? Not in general terms. Specifically, is it the stairs? Carrying groceries? Is there something you used to do? Something you loved that your body has quietly made harder? Leave me a comment. Your age and one thing you've noticed. I read every comment on this channel. Not a team. Me. And sometimes what one person writes is exactly what someone else needed to find. 7 foods. From powerful to life-changing. Let's go. Number 7. Cottage cheese. I know, not exactly a dramatic opener, but what's happening inside this food is worth understanding, especially for a body over 65. Cottage cheese is rich in casein protein. Casein digests slowly. It releases amino acids steadily over 5 to 7 hours, rather than spiking quickly and dropping the whey or egg whites do. In a younger adult, that slow release is convenient. In an older adult with anabolic resistance, it's actually important. Because anabolic resistance means your muscles need more time to respond to a protein signal. Fast proteins arrive, do what they can, and disappear before the muscle has really had a chance to act. Casein stays in the system longer. It keeps the signal going, long after other proteins have moved on. Researchers at the University of Maastricht, one of the more serious centers for protein and aging research, found that older adults who had casein before sleep showed 22% greater overnight muscle protein synthesis compared to those who had fast-digesting protein or nothing at all. 22% more repair while sleeping. I think about Harold when I talk about this one. 79, retired electrician from Memphis. His son brought him in. Noticed Harold was gripping the stair railing every single time, even just going down a few steps. Harold's daytime diet was honestly pretty reasonable, but nothing before bed. That overnight window was just empty. We added 3/4 of a cup of full-fat cottage cheese about 30 minutes before sleep. Nothing else changed initially. 10 weeks later, Harold mentioned almost offhandedly that he'd stopped reaching for the railing. Not because he decided to stop, he just didn't need it anymore. Full fat, not low fat. The fat slows gastric emptying, which stretches the casein release window even longer. If you want, stir in a small amount of raw honey. There's research out of the University of Memphis suggesting the natural sugars create a mild insulin response that helps move those amino acids into muscle tissue more efficiently. It's a small thing, but it seems to help. 3/4 of a cup, full fat within about 30 minutes of bed. Number 6, canned tuna. I know it sounds almost too simple, but from a pure leucine to cost standpoint, there aren't many foods that compete with it. A single 5-ounce can of chunk-light tuna in water. 25 grams of complete protein. Leucine content in the top 5 of any whole food source. Costs between $1 and $1.50. Now here's what specifically matters for adults over 65. Researchers at Purdue University found that older adults need a minimum of about 3 grams of leucine per meal to reliably trigger muscle protein synthesis. That threshold is roughly 40% higher than what a younger adult needs, which is another way of saying the standard advice on protein portions was probably calculated for someone younger than you. 1 can of tuna delivers somewhere between 2.8 and 3.1 grams, depending on the variety, right at or just above what aging muscles need to respond. A study in the Journal of Nutrition followed over 300 adults over 68 for 2 years, tracking leucine intake against actual functional leg strength. Those who consistently hit that 3-gram threshold showed 41% slower decline in lower body strength. 41%. from hitting a nutritional threshold. Not a gym program, not a medication. Evelyn, 76, retired nurse from Charlotte. Her physical therapist had flagged a subtle instability in her left leg during a gait assessment, the kind of thing that's easy to dismiss until it becomes something bigger. She was already eating tuna, low-fat mayo, rice cakes, always as a side, never timed deliberately, never paired with anything that would improve absorption. We made 3 small changes. Better fat alongside it, a tablespoon of olive oil directly on the tuna, and moved it to lunch as her main protein anchor for the day. 8 weeks later, the physical therapist took that flag off her file. Evelyn mentioned it to me almost in passing. She seemed more surprised than I was. Don't drain all the water from the can, leave a small amount in, because water-soluble amino acids leach into the packing liquid, and you want those. Drizzle a tablespoon of olive oil over it before eating. The oleic acid reduces inflammation in muscle cell membranes, the same inflammation that raises the threshold leucine needs to cross to do its job. Mediterranean cultures have paired these 2 foods for a long time. We now understand a bit better why that combination works. Number 5. This one tends to catch people off guard, especially those who've always assumed that real muscle support has to come from animal protein. Black beans. The most common objection I hear, plant protein is incomplete. Without all 9 essential amino acids in a single source, muscle protein synthesis can't fully activate. In isolation, that's technically accurate. But when black beans are prepared and paired correctly, and I'll tell you exactly how, researchers at the University of Illinois describe the result as, in their words, a complete anabolic package for aging muscle. The reason isn't just the protein. Black beans contain something called resistant starch, a carbohydrate that bypasses normal digestion and feeds the beneficial bacteria in your gut that produce short-chain fatty acids. Short-chain fatty acids help reduce systemic gut inflammation, and after 65, that matters more than most people realize. Because gut inflammation is directly correlated with how severe anabolic resistance becomes in muscle tissue. Think of it this way: your gut and your muscles are constantly talking to each other through inflammatory signals. When the gut is inflamed, that conversation gets noisy. And when it's noisy, your muscles have a harder time hearing the protein signal. Black beans help quiet some of that noise. The American Journal of Clinical Nutrition followed adults aged 65 to 82 for 3 years. Those who ate legumes 5 or more times a week showed 31% greater preservation of lean muscle mass, independent of total protein intake. Independent, meaning something in the beans beyond the protein itself was driving that result. Vincent, 73, retired postal worker from Detroit. He described his legs to me as, and this stuck with me, like they belonged to someone older than me. He was eating decent protein overall, almost no legumes. His gut inflammation markers were elevated. His muscle response to any kind of activity was minimal. We added black beans to his lunch 4 times a week with brown rice. 12 weeks later, he said his legs felt like they were starting to cooperate again. The brown rice pairing matters, by the way. Rice supplies the methionine that beans lack. Beans supply the lysine that rice lacks. Together, they form a complete amino acid profile. And together, they cost less per gram of usable protein than almost anything else in the store. Half a cup, 3 to 5 times a week at lunch. That's the approach. Number 4, sardines. I've talked about sardines on this channel before, mostly in the context of circulation and inflammation. But today I want to focus on something specific, a compound they contain that almost no other affordable food delivers in any meaningful amount. It's called carnosine. Carnosine is a small protein fragment, technically a dipeptide, two amino acids bonded together, found almost exclusively in animal muscle tissue. And sardines happen to have among the highest concentrations of any food most people would actually eat. Here's what it does. Every time you move, every step, every stare, every time you push yourself up from a chair, acid builds up inside your muscle fibers. That acid buildup is one of the main reasons older muscles fatigue quickly and take so long to recover. Carnosine buffers that acid directly inside the fiber before fatigue can take hold. The Australian Institute of Sport studied adults over 65. Those with higher carnosine levels showed 27% lower muscle fatigue markers and about 19% better functional movement capacity over 12 weeks. The group in that study who got their carnosine from food, sardines 4 times a week, got essentially the same outcome without supplementation. Food over pills when the food is available, and there's more in one tin. 23 grams of complete protein, vitamin D above the daily recommended value for seniors, calcium from the bones, and CoQ10, which powers the mitochondria inside your muscle cells. CoQ10 levels in muscle tissue drop by as much as 57% after 70. I've seen this pattern over and over in patients who describe a kind of heaviness. Not pain exactly, just resistance. Like their muscles are working harder than they should be for ordinary things. Patricia comes to mind, 78, retired school principal from Louisville. That's exactly how she described it. A heaviness in her legs that wasn't there 2 years earlier. Not pain, not what she'd call weakness, just more effort than there used to be. Her CoQ10 levels were in the lower quartile for her age, carnosine intake essentially 0. 1 tin of wild-caught sardines in olive oil 4 times a week. 6 weeks later, she said her legs felt lighter. Not dramatically. She made sure I understood that, but enough that she walked over to her neighbor's house without thinking twice about whether she should. Eat the bones. Completely soft, fully digestible, and the calcium in them triggers the electrical signal behind every muscle contraction. Lemon juice alongside, and if you can manage it, a small amount of kimchi or sauerkraut. Research from the Karolinska Institute found that lactic acid bacteria in fermented foods increase CoQ10 bioavailability by up to 24%. The sardines supply it. The fermented food helps you actually use it. Number 3, red lentils. Honestly, I would have ranked these lower a few years ago. I knew they were nutritious. I just didn't fully understand what they do specifically in an aging body until I spent time with the research out of the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. 2 things changed my thinking. The first is arginine. Red lentils have among the highest arginine concentrations of any plant food. And arginine is the direct precursor to nitric oxide, the compound that causes blood vessels to relax and widen, which increases blood flow and oxygen and nutrient delivery to muscle tissue. After 70, nitric oxide production drops by roughly 50%, half. And this is the part that I think gets underestimated. You can be eating good protein. You can be hitting your leucine threshold at every meal. But if the blood supply reaching your muscles is running at half capacity, a lot of that nutrition just doesn't land the way it should. Lentils help with the delivery side of the equation, not just the raw materials. The Buck Institute found that arginine-derived nitric oxide signaling in older adults on legume-rich diets correlated with 33% greater post-exercise muscle repair compared to those with low arginine intake. 33% faster repair from something that costs less than $1 per serving. The second compound is spermidine, and I realize that name sounds strange, but the research behind it is worth a moment. Spermidine is one of the only naturally occurring compounds shown to trigger autophagy in muscle cells. the process by which your body breaks down old, damaged cellular material and recycles it into something functional. In aging muscle, that debris accumulates, and its accumulation is one of the quieter drivers of decline. Nature Medicine published research showing that adults with higher dietary spermidine intake had meaningfully better preservation of muscle mass and physical function into their late 70s and 80s. Lentils are among the top 5 dietary sources of spermidine on the planet, and they happen to also win on cost and protein content and anti-inflammatory profile simultaneously, which is a fairly unusual combination. I think about Carolyn when I talk about this one. 81, retired librarian from Providence. Her doctor had mentioned sarcopenia, just sort of mentioned it in passing, and she went home and cried. Not really because of the word, because of what it implied about the years she had left. We added red lentils to her lunch 5 times a week, turmeric, black pepper, a spoonful of tahini stirred in after cooking. 12 weeks later, her muscle mass measurement had stabilized. Not a dramatic reversal, just stopped moving in the wrong direction. For someone who'd been told decline was inevitable, that was a number that mattered quite a lot. Use red lentils, not green or brown, higher arginine content. Cook faster, preserve more of the compounds. Cook in low sodium broth instead of water. Simmer gently. Don't boil hard because high heat degrades spermidine by up to 30%. Turmeric and black pepper during cooking. The curcumin reduces anabolic resistance, and piperine in the black pepper dramatically increases how much of that curcumin your body actually absorbs. Studies have measured up to 2,000% greater bioavailability. A tablespoon of tahini stirred in after cooking completes the amino acid profile. It provides the methionine that lentils are relatively low in. 1 cup 5 times a week at lunch. Number 2, I want to acknowledge something before I say the word. Tofu. I know. Some of you checked out just now. I've seen it happen in my office too. So I'll just give you the data, and you can decide what to do with it. 100 grams of firm tofu, 17 grams of complete soy protein, leucine content that's comparable to chicken breast. A full block runs about $1.50 and gives you 3 to 4 servings. What makes it specifically relevant for adults over 65 is a compound called genistein. Genistein is an isoflavone, a naturally occurring plant compound. In research from Tufts University found that it interacts directly with the mTOR pathway in aging muscle cells. The mTOR pathway is essentially the master switch for muscle protein synthesis. After 70, that switch becomes less responsive. Muscles stop reacting the way they should, even when protein intake is adequate. Genistein appears to partially wake that switch back up, not completely. But the Tufts study found that older adults consuming soy protein with naturally occurring genistein showed 28% greater mTOR activation compared to those eating equivalent protein from animal sources. 28% greater activation of the muscle-building switch from tofu. I mean, that's not a small finding. Bernard, 82, retired engineer from Pittsburgh. He had never eaten tofu in his life, and he made that very clear the first time I suggested it. He came to me after a hip replacement with significant muscle loss in both legs. His physical therapy had just sort of stalled. Everyone was doing their job. The progress just wasn't there. We introduced firm tofu 4 times a week alongside sardines and red lentils. 3 months later, his therapist told me she was seeing improvement she honestly didn't expect for his age. She seemed a little uncertain when she said it, like she wasn't sure what had changed. Bernard didn't spend much time on the mechanism. He just told me he could stand up from a chair without pushing off the armrests. That was it. That was what mattered to him. To prepare it well, press it first. Wrap it in a clean towel, put something heavy on top for 20 minutes, gets rid of the excess water, lets it absorb flavor when you cook it. Pan sear in olive oil until golden on both sides. Low sodium soy sauce and fresh ginger. The ginger matters more than it sounds. Gingerol, the active compound in fresh ginger, reduces the muscle membrane inflammation that drives anabolic resistance. It helps create a better environment for the genistein to actually work. 4 to 5 times a week, at least 150 grams per serving. Right here between number 2 and number 1. If something in this video has shifted how you're thinking about what you eat, hit the like button, not for the metric, because the algorithm uses that signal to show this video to more people who need it. People who are quietly losing strength and have no idea why. And if you haven't subscribed, the button's right below. Every week, evidence-based content for adults over 65. No products, no supplements, just the research. Now, number 1. Full-fat Greek yogurt. I know, probably not what you were expecting, but what this food does inside a body over 65 is genuinely more interesting than it looks. And I want to explain both parts of it because one builds on the other. The first part is protein delivery. Full-fat Greek yogurt contains both casein and whey in their natural ratio. Not isolated, not processed, just the way they occur together in dairy. The whey hits quickly, spikes amino acids fast, gives the muscle an immediate signal. The casein follows slowly, sustaining that signal for hours. So you get fast ignition and a slow, sustained burn in a single cup. For an aging body dealing with anabolic resistance, that combination works well because it addresses both the speed problem and the duration problem at once. A controlled trial from McMaster University compared muscle protein synthesis in adults over 65. Greek yogurt versus an equivalent amount of chicken breast after light resistance activity. The Greek yogurt group showed 19% greater muscle protein synthesis over the 6 hours following activity, 19% greater than chicken after a light walk. In adults over 65, the second part is what I find more important. Full-fat Greek yogurt contains live probiotic cultures, specifically Lactobacillus acidophilus and Bifidobacterium longum. And this connects to something researchers now call the gut-muscle axis. After 75, the gut microbiome in most older adults has lost a significant amount of its diversity. And that loss correlates directly with how severe anabolic resistance becomes in muscle tissue. The gut isn't just digesting food, it's regulating how much of that food your muscles can actually use. When gut health is compromised, the anabolic environment is compromised, regardless of what else you're doing right. UC Davis published research showing that older adults with healthier gut microbiomes had 34% greater lean muscle mass preservation and better lower body strength, even when their total protein intake was identical to the comparison group. Same protein, 34% difference. The gut was the variable. Greek yogurt addresses that. The live cultures help restore the diversity that aging gradually erodes. And when that diversity improves, the environment downstream in the muscle starts to improve with it. I think about it this way. Every other food on this list is a message. Greek yogurt is part of the system that makes sure those messages actually arrive. Margaret, 74, came to me after her second fall in 6 months. She was genuinely frightened of her own stairs, had been eating low-fat everything for years, almost no fermented foods at all, and her gut inflammation markers were elevated. We added full-fat Greek yogurt twice a day, once in the morning, once within about 30 minutes of any physical activity, even just a short walk. And we brought in plain kefir 4 times a week alongside dinner. 8 weeks later, she walked up her stairs without holding the railing. She mentioned it to me casually, like it was just something she'd noticed. It wasn't from one change. It was from a biological environment that had slowly started working properly again. 1 cup of full-fat plain Greek yogurt in the morning, always plain. The flavored versions typically replace the fat with sugar, and the sugar works against what we're trying to do. A second serving within 30 minutes of any physical activity, even a 10-minute walk. That post-activity window is when muscle tissue is most receptive to protein signals. Add a tablespoon of ground flaxseed for omega-3s, a small drizzle of raw honey. There's evidence it improves probiotic survival through the digestive tract. 4 times a week, 4 to 6 ounces of plain kefir alongside dinner. Kefir carries a broader spectrum of probiotic strains than yogurt alone, and the two together seem to have a more comprehensive effect on gut restoration than either one alone. Always full fat, always plain. Check for live active cultures on the label. Before I close, I want to say one more thing about these 7 foods together, because the mistake would be to treat them as 7 separate items on a shopping list. They interact. The probiotics in Greek yogurt improve how the gut absorbs the protein in tuna and sardines. The olive oil you pair with tuna reduces the muscle membrane inflammation that makes lentils less effective. The resistant starch in black beans feeds the gut bacteria that make Greek yogurt's cultures more useful. The effect isn't just additive. It seems to work better when these foods are combined consistently than when any one of them is used alone. And that's really the point of all of this. This isn't about eating perfectly. It's about gradually restoring the biological conditions that your body needs to function well. Not in theory, but in the way you actually move through a day. Muscle loss after 65 isn't simply aging. It is a biological process that can be slowed, and in many cases meaningfully reversed, when the body is given what it actually needs. 7 foods: cottage cheese, canned tuna, black beans, sardines, red lentils, firm tofu, full-fat Greek yogurt, available at any grocery store, most under $2 per serving, all studied in adults specifically over 65 and older, and when used together consistently, capable of changing the direction of how your body moves through the years ahead, not overnight, but meaningfully. Every study I referenced is linked in the description. Read them, share them with your doctor, use them to have a better conversation about your own care. And if you're not subscribed yet, the button is right below. Every week, this is what I try to do here. Bring you the research that actually applies to your body at your age without selling you anything. One last thing. Tell me in the comments the one thing you want your body to let you do again. Not a list, just one. Because that's where this starts. That specific thing for you. Until next time, eat well. Move every day. And don't stop believing that your best isn't behind you.